conference room felt like a tomb. Mr. Tony slammed my presentation down so hard that coffee cups jumped on the table. His face was red with anger, veins bulging from his forehead like angry rivers. "This garbage is exactly why you'll never amount to anything here, Zora," he sneered, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The other employees stared at their laptops, too scared to look up. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. I had spent 3 weeks on that presentation. 3 weeks of staying late, missing dinners, researching every detail. And he just threw it in the trash like it meant nothing. "You're fired," he said with a sick smile. "Pack your things and get out. Security will escort you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. Around the table, my coworkers avoided eye contact. Nobody said a word. Nobody defended me. They just sat there like statues while he destroyed my life to feed his massive ego. I stood up on shaky legs, my whole body trembling. This wasn't just about losing a job. This was about being humiliated in front of everyone I worked with. This was about being told I was worthless. But I had no idea this moment would change everything. My hands shook as I packed my desk into a cardboard box. Photos of my family, a coffee mug from college, pens I'd bought with my own money. 5 years of my life reduced to one small box. The walk to the elevator felt like a death march. I could hear whispers behind me, feel eyes watching my every step. The security guard waited by the doors, his face expressionless. He didn't even look at me as we rode down together. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a slap. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my box, watching people walk past me like I was invisible. Cars honked in traffic. Life kept moving while mine had just crashed into a wall. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I was too shocked, too numb. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking how work was going. I couldn't even think about how to answer that. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was the way he looked at me when he said those words. Like I was nothing. Like I was dirt under his expensive shoes. I walked to my beat-up Honda and drove home in silence, not knowing that this was actually the first day of my real life. My name is Zora Buck. 5 years ago, I thought my boss had ended my career. I was 26, fresh out of college, and desperate to prove myself in the corporate world. I believed that if I worked hard enough, long enough, smart enough, success would follow. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Mr. Tony was the kind of boss who took credit for your wins and blamed you for his losses. He drove a BMW, wore $1,000 suits, and treated employees like they should be grateful just to breathe the same air as him. I had given everything to that company. Weekends, holidays, birthday parties I missed. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought hard work would be rewarded. I thought if I just kept my head down and did my job, I'd eventually get the respect I deserved. The presentation he threw away? It was a marketing strategy that could have saved the company millions. I had researched their competitors, analyzed market trends, created detailed charts and graphs. It was solid work. Good work. But Mr. Tony didn't fire me because the work was bad. He fired me because his own boss had questioned one of his decisions that morning. He needed someone to blame, someone to take his anger out on. I was just convenient. My apartment felt smaller when I walked in carrying that box. It was a tiny one-bedroom place with thin walls and a bathroom door that didn't close properly. The furniture was mostly secondhand, bought from garage sales and Facebook Marketplace. I set the box down and looked around. This was it. This was my life now. No job, no income, no plan. Rent was due in 12 days and I had maybe $300 in my checking account. I sat on my couch and finally let the tears come. Big, ugly sobs that made my chest hurt. I cried for the humiliation, for the unfairness, for the fear of what came next. I cried until my eyes were red and swollen, until I had no tears left. My phone rang. It was my best friend Jamie, calling to see how my big presentation went. I stared at the screen, unable to answer. How do you tell someone that your life just fell apart in 10 minutes? The apartment was so quiet I could hear my neighbor's TV through the wall. Some game show where people won money and prizes for answering questions. I wished life was that simple. I wished there were easy answers to hard problems. Outside my window, the sun was setting. Tomorrow would be my first day as an unemployed person. The next few weeks blurred together like a bad dream. I applied for jobs every day, sending out dozens of resumes and cover letters. Most companies never replied. The ones that did sent form letters that all said the same thing. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. I had to pawn my grandmother's ring to pay rent. The pawn shop owner gave me $200 for something that meant the world to me. I signed the paperwork with tears in my eyes, promising myself I'd get it back someday. Grocery shopping became a math problem. Ramen noodles, generic cereal, day-old bread from the discount rack. I learned that you can live on $5 a day if you have to. It's not fun, but you can do it. The worst part was the silence. No phone calls, no emails, no interviews. It felt like the whole world had forgotten I existed. I started to wonder if Mr. Tony was right. Maybe I really was worthless. Maybe I really would never amount to anything. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to my stomach growl, wondering how long I could keep this up. The doubt crept in like poison, whispering that I should just give up. But something deep inside me refused to quit. One night, after another rejection email, I grabbed a notebook and pen. If no one would hire me, maybe I could hire myself. The idea seemed crazy, but what did I have to lose? I wrote down everything I was good at: marketing, social media, writing, research. Then I wrote down problems I could solve for small businesses. Most of them couldn't afford big marketing agencies, but they needed help getting customers. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. It was small, barely there, but real. I could start my own thing. I could build something from nothing. I didn't need Mr. Tony's permission or anyone else's approval. I spent that whole night researching how to start a freelance business. I watched YouTube videos, read articles, took notes until my hand cramped. By morning, I had a basic plan. The next day, I created a simple website using a free template. Buck Marketing Solutions, I called it. It looked amateur, but it was mine. I wrote descriptions of services I could offer, set up a contact form, and held my breath. Then I did something that scared me more than anything. I posted about it on social media. Starting my own marketing business, I wrote, ready to help small businesses grow. It felt like jumping off a cliff. My first client was Mrs. Patterson, who owned a small bakery downtown. She found me through a neighborhood Facebook group where I'd nervously posted about my services. She needed help with social media marketing and had a budget of $300. It wasn't much, but it felt like winning the lottery. I threw myself into her project like my life depended on it, because it did. I took photos of her pastries, wrote engaging captions, created a content calendar. I worked 16-hour days to make sure everything was perfect. Within 2 weeks, her bakery's followers doubled. More importantly, foot traffic increased by 30%. Mrs. Patterson was so happy she referred me to 2 other small business owners. Slowly, very slowly, things started to change. I wasn't making much money, but I was making something. More than that, I was proving to myself that I had value, that I could create something meaningful. Every small victory felt huge. When a client's sales increased, when someone left a positive review, when another referral came in. These weren't just business wins. They were proof that I wasn't the worthless person Mr. Tony said I was. I worked from my kitchen table, but I felt more important than I ever had in that fancy corporate office. Because this time, I was building something that belonged to me. 6 months later, I had 12 regular clients and enough income to stop eating ramen every night. I celebrated by buying a real coffee from a cafe instead of making instant at home. It tasted like victory. My clients started seeing real results. The flower shop increased sales by 50%. The auto repair garage booked 3 months out. The yoga studio doubled their class sizes. Word spread through the small business community that there was this young woman who actually knew what she was doing. I moved my office from the kitchen table to the corner of my bedroom. I bought a used desk from Craigslist and a proper office chair. It wasn't much, but it felt professional. It felt like progress. The best part was how my clients treated me. With respect. They listened to my ideas, implemented my suggestions, and thanked me for my help. Such a different world from corporate life, where every idea was questioned and every success was someone else's. I started sleeping better at night. The constant worry about money faded into the background. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't desperate anymore either. I was building something real, one client at a time. For the first time since that horrible day in the conference room, I felt proud of who I was becoming. By the end of my first year, I needed help. I was working 80-hour weeks and turning away potential clients because I couldn't handle the workload. It was a good problem to have, but still a problem. I hired my first employee, a recent college graduate named Sam, who reminded me of myself a year earlier. Eager, hardworking, grateful for the opportunity. I promised myself I'd be the kind of boss I wished I'd had. We rented a small office space above a sandwich shop. It was tiny, just 2 desks and a filing cabinet, but it had a window and felt official. I bought a cheap coffee maker and a plant that I somehow managed not to kill. Sam and I worked side by side, taking on bigger projects and more ambitious clients. We stayed late, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Because we were building something together. My business grew beyond just social media. We offered website design, email marketing, brand development. Clients trusted us with their dreams, and we delivered results that exceeded their expectations. The company that had fired me was still struggling with the same problems they'd had a year earlier. I heard through industry connections that they'd lost several major clients. Meanwhile, my little operation was thriving. Karma, I thought to myself, has a sense of humor. Not everything went smoothly. In my second year, I lost 3 major clients in 1 month. Cash flow became a nightmare. I had to delay my own salary to pay Sam, and for a few weeks I was back to eating ramen and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. One particularly bad day, I sat in my office after Sam had gone home, staring at a pile of unpaid invoices. I thought about calling it quits, getting a regular job with a steady paycheck and health insurance. But then I remembered Mr. Tony's sneer. I remembered how small he'd made me feel, how powerless. I couldn't go back to that. I wouldn't. Instead of giving up, I pivoted. I analyzed what went wrong with those lost clients and changed my approach. I tightened our processes, improved our communication, and went after a different type of business. The struggle made me stronger. It taught me that setbacks aren't failures unless you let them be. Every problem was just a puzzle to solve. Every challenge was a chance to get better. Within 3 months, we'd not only replaced those lost clients but added 5 new ones. The near disaster became a turning point that forced me to level up my business skills. Sometimes you have to almost lose everything to realize how much you're capable of winning. Everything changed when Riverside Manufacturing hired us. They were a mid-sized company struggling with outdated marketing and declining sales. Their CEO, Miss Rodriguez, was desperate enough to take a chance on a small agency run by someone barely 30 years old. The project was huge. Complete brand overhaul, new website, social media strategy, traditional advertising. More money than I'd ever handled before. More responsibility than I'd ever carried. Sam and I worked around the clock for 3 months. We researched their industry, analyzed their competitors, interviewed their customers. We created a strategy that positioned them as innovative leaders instead of outdated followers. The results were explosive. Their website traffic increased by 400%. Sales inquiries doubled, then tripled. Within 6 months, they'd hired 50 new employees to handle demand. Miss Rodriguez was so impressed, she recommended us to other companies. Suddenly, my phone was ringing with opportunities I'd only dreamed about. Big corporations wanting to hire the little agency that had transformed Riverside Manufacturing. Industry magazines wrote articles about our innovative approach and fresh perspective. I was invited to speak at conferences to share my story with other entrepreneurs. The girl who'd been fired for being worthless was now being called a rising star in the marketing world. Success brought new challenges. We moved to a real office building with conference rooms and a reception area. I hired 5 more employees, then 10, then 15. Managing people was harder than I'd expected, but I remembered every bad boss I'd ever had and tried to do the opposite. I treated my team like partners, not servants. When they succeeded, I celebrated. When they struggled, I helped. When they had ideas, I listened. The office culture we built was everything my old corporate job wasn't. Revenue grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands. I bought my first new car, moved to a nice apartment, started investing money I never thought I'd have. But I was careful not to let success go to my head the way it had with Mr. Tony. The best moment was when I walked into that pawn shop and bought back my grandmother's ring. The same owner was working, and he remembered me. "Looks like things turned around," he said with a smile. I just nodded, too emotional to speak. Wearing that ring again felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost. It reminded me where I'd come from and how far I'd traveled. It reminded me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. By year 3, my agency was handling multi-million-dollar accounts. We'd outgrown our office space twice and employed 42 people. The success felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. But I wanted more than just a successful business. I wanted to build real wealth, the kind that would give me true freedom. So I started investing in other companies, becoming an angel investor for startups that reminded me of my early days. My first investment was in a food delivery app run by 2 college dropouts. Everyone said it would fail, but I saw something in their hunger and determination that reminded me of myself. 6 months later, a major corporation bought them for $20 million. Other investments followed: a sustainable fashion brand, a mental health app, a renewable energy startup. Not all of them succeeded, but enough did to build a substantial portfolio. I was learning that money wasn't just about security anymore. It was about power, about having options, about being able to say yes or no on my own terms. For someone who'd once lived on ramen noodles, that kind of freedom felt intoxicating. The scared girl who'd been escorted out by security was becoming a woman with real influence in the business world. 5 years after that humiliating day in the conference room, I was featured on the cover of Business Weekly magazine. "The Comeback Kid," the headline read, "How Zora Buck Built an Empire from Nothing." The article detailed my journey from fired employee to successful entrepreneur to angel investor. It mentioned my agency's impressive client list and my growing reputation as someone who could spot winning startups before anyone else. Reading about my own life felt strange. The writer made it sound so smooth, so inevitable. They didn't capture the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the mornings I'd woken up terrified I'd lose everything, the constant doubt that whispered I wasn't good enough. But they got the ending right. I had built something substantial. I had created jobs for dozens of people. I had helped hundreds of businesses grow and succeed. I had turned my pain into purpose. The magazine came out on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had received 50 interview requests and 100 investment inquiries. Success, I learned, creates its own momentum. That weekend, I bought my dream house. A beautiful mansion with a circular driveway, floor-to-ceiling windows, and more space than I knew what to do with. It felt like the final piece of my transformation. My new house became a symbol of everything I'd accomplished. The circular driveway, where I'd once imagined driving my beat-up Honda, now hosted my Tesla and the cars of successful friends who came for dinner parties. The home office was my favorite room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk overlooking the garden, awards and photos from my journey displayed on the walls. It was where I made million-dollar investment decisions and planned the next phase of my empire. I'd officially transitioned from running my agency day-to-day to focusing on investments. My team was capable enough to handle operations, and I was more valuable as a strategic advisor and investor. The transformation from desperate job seeker to wealthy businesswoman still amazed me sometimes. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the confident person staring back. But success brought unexpected challenges. Old friends acted differently around me, some resentful of my wealth, others suddenly very interested in my time. I learned to distinguish between people who valued me and people who valued what I could do for them. The loneliness of success was something no magazine article ever mentioned. When you're at the top, it's hard to know who you can trust. Rumors started reaching me about Mr. Tony's company. Maverick Industries was struggling. They'd lost several major clients, their stock price was down 60%, and there were whispers about potential bankruptcy. Industry contacts shared stories of mismanagement, missed opportunities, and a toxic culture that drove away top talent. Apparently, Mr. Tony's leadership style hadn't improved much since my time there. I listened to these reports with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindicated. The man who'd called me worthless was watching his own empire crumble. But another part of me felt sorry for the innocent employees who'd suffer because of his poor decisions. I remembered my former coworkers who'd sat silently while he humiliated me. Some had reached out over the years, congratulating me on my success and subtly asking if I was hiring. I'd been polite but distant. Loyalty, I'd learned, was a two-way street. The business world is smaller than people think. Word travels fast about who's rising and who's falling. My name was increasingly mentioned in the same breath as visionary and successful. His name was increasingly mentioned with words like struggling and outdated. Karma was working its magic, but I wasn't done with it yet. On a crisp Tuesday morning, my assistant buzzed my office. "There's a Mr. Tony here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." My heart stopped. After 5 years, he was here, in my building, asking to see me. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. I looked around my office, at the awards on the walls, at the view of the city through my windows, at the life I'd built from the ashes of his cruelty. "Send him in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He walked in wearing the same kind of expensive suit he'd always favored, but something was different. His confidence looked forced, his smile seemed practiced. The man who'd once filled every room with his arrogance now looked smaller somehow. "Zora," he said, arms spread wide like we were old friends. "Look at you. I always knew you had potential." I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just leaned back in my chair and watched him perform. "Mr. Tony?" I said neutrally. "This is unexpected." His eyes darted around my office, taking in the obvious signs of success. I could see him recalculating, trying to figure out how the worthless employee had ended up here while he was clearly struggling. "I have a proposition for you," he said. He launched into a polished presentation about synergistic opportunities and mutual benefit. Maverick Industries, he explained, was looking for strategic partnerships with innovative companies. He painted a picture of combining his experience with my fresh energy. I watched him perform, marveling at his audacity. The man who destroyed my confidence was now trying to charm his way into my success. He spoke as if firing me had been some kind of favor, as if he'd launched my career by destroying it. "Your company and mine could accomplish amazing things together," he said, leaning forward with that fake sincerity I remembered so well. "I've been following your journey, Zora. Impressive work. Really impressive." The lies came so easily to him. He hadn't been following my journey. He'd probably only learned about my success when his own company started failing, and someone suggested he ask me for help. "And what exactly would this partnership look like?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. His pitch got more desperate. Investment opportunities, shared resources, his connections in that exchange for my innovation. He even suggested I could benefit from his mentorship and years of experience. I let him talk, watching him dig his own grave with every word. When he finally finished, I smiled for the first time since he'd walked in. "I'll need to review any proposal through proper channels," I said. "Have your people send the paperwork to my investment team." He blinked, clearly not expecting bureaucracy. In his mind, this was a conversation between equals, maybe even a favor he was doing for me. The idea that he'd have to go through the same process as every other desperate entrepreneur seeking my money hadn't occurred to him. "Paperwork," he said, his smile faltering. "Zora, we're old colleagues. Surely we can work something out directly." Old colleagues. That's how he saw our history. Not as boss and employee, certainly not as powerful man and victim. Just two business people who'd worked together once upon a time. "I have policies," I said firmly. "Everyone goes through the same evaluation process, no exceptions." I could see his frustration building. This wasn't how he'd expected this meeting to go. He'd probably imagined I'd be grateful, maybe even starstruck to see him again. Instead, I was treating him like any other supplicant seeking investment. "Fine," he said, his charm slipping slightly. "But let's not let red tape slow down a good opportunity. Time is somewhat sensitive here." Sensitive, which meant he was desperate, which meant Maverick Industries was in worse shape than the rumors suggested. "My team is very thorough," I said. "We'll be in touch." I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He had no choice but to follow my lead. 3 weeks later, my investment committee rejected Maverick Industries' proposal. The report was damning. Declining revenues, poor management, toxic workplace culture, and leadership that blamed everyone but themselves for the company's problems. My team didn't know about my personal history with Mr. Tony. They'd evaluated his company purely on merit and found it lacking. The irony was beautiful. He was failing by every objective measure, not just in my biased opinion. The rejection letter was professional but final. After careful consideration, we've decided not to move forward with an investment in Maverick Industries at this time. His response came within hours. First, a polite email asking for feedback, then a more urgent phone call that I let go to voicemail, then increasingly desperate messages that revealed just how badly he needed this deal. The final voicemail was the most telling. "Zora, you owe me this. I gave you experience, I taught you the business. You wouldn't be where you are without what you learned at Maverick." I saved that message. The delusion was so complete, so perfect. In his mind, firing me had been a gift. Humiliating me had been education. He genuinely believed I owed him my success. The man who'd told me I'd never amount to anything was now begging for my help. Industry news confirmed what I already suspected. Maverick Industries was collapsing. Stock price in free fall, mass layoffs, creditors circling like vultures. The business press was having a field day with the downfall of a once promising company. Anonymous former employees shared horror stories about Mr. Tony's leadership. Stolen credit, public humiliations, impossible demands, and zero accountability. The picture they painted was of a man who'd destroyed his own company through arrogance and poor judgment. I thought about all the good people who'd worked at Maverick, who were now losing their jobs because of his failures. They deserved better. They deserved better 5 years ago, when they'd watched him humiliate me and said nothing. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting quotes about Maverick's collapse. I declined all interviews. My success spoke loudly enough without my having to say anything. But I was planning something bigger than just watching from the sidelines. Maverick Industries was about to go up for sale, and I had the resources to make a very interesting offer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success. Sometimes it's taking everything your enemy thought belonged to them and proving you can do it better. The scared girl who'd been escorted out by security was about to become Maverick Industries' new owner. When Maverick Industries officially went up for sale, I made my move. Not through my investment fund, but through a shell company that disguised my involvement. I wanted the purchase to go through before Mr. Tony realized who was buying his life's work. My bid was aggressive but fair, well above market value for a failing company, but a fraction of what Maverick had once been worth. The board of directors, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, accepted immediately. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon. Maverick Industries acquired by Phoenix Holdings in surprise deal. The business press speculated about the mysterious buyer and their plans for the struggling company. Mr. Glane, Tony found out the same way everyone else did, by reading the news. I imagined his shock, his desperation to understand who had bought his company and what it meant for his future. He called my office immediately. "I need to speak with whoever bought Maverick," he told my assistant. "This is urgent. They need to know about the operational challenges, the transition issues. I need to be involved." Still believing he was indispensable. Still convinced that his experience was valuable. Still completely unaware that his worst nightmare was about to come true. My assistant, following my instructions, told him that the new ownership would be in touch soon. Very soon. Monday morning, I walked into Maverick Industries as the new owner. The same building where I'd been humiliated 5 years earlier, now mine. The security guard who'd escorted me out nodded respectfully as I entered. "Good morning, Miss Buck." I went straight to Mr. Tony's office, my office now. He was waiting inside, probably hoping to charm whoever had bought his company. When he saw me walk through the door, his face went white. "Surprise," I said, settling into the chair behind his desk. "We need to talk." For the first time in my life, I watched Mr. Tony speechless. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, his brain struggling to process what was happening. The woman he'd called worthless had just bought his company. You bought Maverick?" he stammered. "Every share," I confirmed. "Congratulations, you now work for me." "Well, actually, you don't work at all anymore." I opened a folder and slid termination papers across the desk, the same type of papers I'd signed 5 years earlier, but with his name on them now. "You're fired," I said, using the exact words he'd used on me. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." His face went through a rainbow of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, desperation. But what I saw most clearly was fear. The fear of losing everything, of being powerless, of being nothing. The fear I'd lived with for months after he'd destroyed my life. Under my leadership, Maverick Industries transformed completely. I cleaned house, removing toxic managers and promoting good employees who'd been held back by the old culture. I invested in new technology, updated outdated processes, and created the kind of workplace I'd always wanted to work in. The company that had been bleeding money and losing clients became profitable within 6 months. We won back old accounts and attracted new ones. Employee satisfaction scores went through the roof. The business press called it one of the most dramatic corporate turnarounds in recent memory. I kept some of the good employees who'd worked there during my time, people who'd been just as trapped by Mr. Tony's leadership as I had been. We never talked about that day in the conference room, but there was an understanding between us. We'd all survived something toxic and come out stronger. The best part was proving that Maverick's problems had never been market conditions or industry challenges. They'd been leadership. Specifically, they'd been Mr. Tony's leadership. Everything he'd said was impossible, became routine under competent management. Every excuse he'd made was exposed as a lie. The company he'd run into the ground flourished the moment he was removed from power. Success, it turned out, had been possible all along. 3 years later, I stood in my mansion's home office, looking out at the garden where I hosted charity events and business dinners. Maverick Industries was now the crown jewel of my portfolio, more profitable than it had ever been under Mr. Tony's leadership. He'd disappeared from the business world entirely. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in another state, a broken man who still blamed everyone but himself for his downfall. He'd never learned the lesson that his ego had destroyed everything he'd built. Sometimes people asked if I felt guilty about what happened to him. The answer was simple: I felt nothing. He'd made his choices, treated people terribly, and faced the consequences. I'd simply refused to let his opinion of me become my reality. The scared girl who'd been told she'd never amount to anything had built an empire worth hundreds of millions. The worthless employee had become more successful than her former boss could have ever imagined. But the real victory wasn't the money, or the power, or the revenge. It was proving to myself that I had value, that I could create something meaningful, that no one else got to define my worth. He fired me because of his ego. I bought his company because of my vision. The difference between us was everything.